In this video, we're going to go through import templates and give you some tips and tricks on how to streamline the process of getting those into the system. So first things first, you want to make sure that you have, or whatever user is importing in templates to the system has permission. So I'm going to go to company, admin, I'm going to look at roles. And for this particular video, I'm just going to stick with the admin role. I'm going to look at the subscriptions. And if you go to company permissions, this company setup checklist has the templates for all of the different sections within Intacct. So you would want to give this company setup checklist permission, but then you also need to give specific permission to the object that the user is doing an import for. So to help that make more sense, I'm going to go to my company module, the setup tab, and this import data, I don't know why it isn't called company setup checklist here on the menu, but it's called import data on the menu. But when you get into it, it is the company setup checklist. So if I come in here, I have the option to create transactions, download my templates, import my templates, and view different. So let's say if I viewed my chart of accounts, I can literally click on it from there. But I do not have permission. My user does not have permission to projects. So if I scroll down to the project section and I try to view, it's going to stop me. It's going to say I don't have any permission to go to projects. I took away the permission for this whole entire section. So let's say if I wanted to create a cost code, I wouldn't be able to do any of that in this particular section. So you can give them the permission to the company setup checklist. They'll be able to see it in company so that they can see all of the possible things that you can import to, but they're not going to be able to view your projects or view your checking accounts or anything like that if they don't have specific permission to that object or module or whatever you want to call it. So like I said, you can come in here and you can download the template for whatever you need. Another handy tip for when you're in here is if you do Control F, you can type in, like, let's say entries, for example, into your little search bar here, and it's going to bring up your entries. So I do want to download the template for a journal entry. That's what I'm going to put in as my example. So I'm going to go to my general ledger journal entries and hit the template button to download that file to my computer. So it's as simple as that. You hit template, open it up, and it's going to give you all of the possible columns that you can bring information into for bringing your transactions in. So I'm going to enable editing here. And sometimes when you open up these templates, they open up in the middle of the template or the workbook or whatever you want to call it. So I'm just going to scroll all the way to the left. And the very first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to find, and I'm going to make sure that I mark off every field that is required on this import template. So I'm going to type in required yes and find all. So then I'm just going to mark them off. And obviously for whatever template it is that you are going to be importing, you're going to want to do the same thing. So you want to make sure that anything that's required in the system, you're absolutely putting that onto the template. If you don't have a required field on, you're just going to get an error. So this exchange rate date is required, but only if you are a multi-currency company, which I am not. So I actually don't need that. So these are the required fields. I have them marked off or highlighted just to make sure that I don't forget to put the information in for them. And then obviously you may want to code to other dimensions, like let's say for, location. Doesn't say it's required, but it is. So we're going to mark that off as required as well. You definitely do have to put in location. You may want to be coding to department. And in my case right now, for this particular transaction, I am going to want to make sure that I have the billable checkbox off. I want the project. I want the item. The cost code or task, it says task ID here on your template, but it is cost code. You can see cost code there on your UI field name. And I want my cost type as well. So these are the fields that I want to bring in when I'm pulling in my transaction. Obviously, you know, put in whichever ones make the most sense to you. So you want to make sure that you're not editing these titles. Your column titles, leave them alone. Don't change them because you're just going to end up getting errors. So leave them alone. And then here on your entries, on your lines here, we're going to start putting in our information. So what journal do I want to go to? And I'm going to put it to my general journal. And I know off the top of my head that the symbol for that is GJ. So I'm going to hit GJ. And then my date format is going to be month, day, year. Description is required. I'm just going to put in test 1. And then here, so this is basically your header information. So if I go back into Intacct and I go to my, actually I can do it right from here. I can create general ledger journal entry here. So my journal is required. So you'll see on my header section, anything with a red asterisk is required. So on my import template, journal, date, description are required. So if I drop this down, then I can see all my different journals, and it's the symbol that I'm using on the template. So I knew it was GJ, but you might be coding to, you know, PDCJ or whatever it is. You're going to want to put in the symbol, not the name of the journal. Description, and then your date. So anything that's on the header here is on one line on your template. And then your entry screen down here is all your lines of different coding for the transaction. So on my template, then if I go back to the template, this is my header information. So I'm saying I want to create a transaction on 3/21/2025 to my general journal. And the description for that transaction is test 1. Then I have all of my lines or my entries that I'm putting in here on the transaction. So, you know, you might have 100 lines on one transaction. So what you would do in that case is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know. So it says it here, start with 1 and then increment by 1 for each subsequent line. So you're going to go down the line with however number of entries you have for your transaction, and this is the header for your transaction. So I am actually going to just do 2 lines. I'm going to do a debit and I'm going to do a credit. So next up, I need my account number. This is my GL account number. And you will have to go to your, well, I mean, you probably know this off the top of your head, but you'll have to go to your chart of accounts, and it's going to be the account number here. So I'm going to just do 5010. Location is required. It's location ID. So take note of that it is ID, not name. And you want to make sure that whatever you're putting on the template matches exactly what you have in Intacct. So if I go to my entities, I want this transaction to go to Shannon GC, but I'm not going to put the name in. I'm going to put the ID in, and it should be E100 exactly as it appears here. So I'm going to put my location in then, E100. And then I'm going to keep going. If you had a department then that you were putting in, you want to make sure it's the ID, not the name that you're putting in. Same with all of your dimensions. It's the ID they want, not the name. I am going to debit COGS 500. And if I keep going, I don't need to fill in these. This I did want to mention, state has tripped up so many people that I've seen in the past. Sometimes, like not necessarily, let's say for this journal entry, but depending on what you're putting in, you might be putting in addresses, and this state might confuse you where you think that it is one of the United States. It's not. So you want to make sure that you're taking a look at these valid values, this section here, and it tells you what you need to fill in for that basically. So a valid value for state would be draft or posted. So when you're putting in this journal entry, is it a state of draft or are you actually posting the transaction? So just make sure that you're kind of taking a notice of these valid values. Same thing here in the billable field. If I want to make this billable, it's actually defaulting to not be billable, which makes sense. But if you did want to make it billable, how would you mark that off and say, yes, it is billable? You would put in a T for true. So I do want it to be billable, so I'm going to say T. And then I want to make sure that I'm coding to my project for this transaction, for my COGS anyway. So I'm going to go back into Intacct. I'm going to go to my projects. Oh, I took away the permission for my projects. Okay, one sec. Okay, so I'm going to use my Porterhouse project, but I do want to make sure that I'm using the ID. So it's 22129. I'm just going to copy it directly from here and then paste it into my template. So that's my project. And then I'm going to want my cost code, cost type, and item. So back into Intacct, let's take a look at the cost codes that are associated with this project. And you don't want to use your header, a cost code. You want to be making sure that you're coding to one of the child cost codes. So I'm going to do 006200. I'm going to type that in, back into Intacct. Let's take a look at the cost types associated with that cost code. I have either OH or OTH, and you need to use the cost type ID. So I'm going to do OTH. And I put that in the wrong field. So 006200. See, I made a mistake already. I'm going to X that. And cost type is OTH. And then if I look at my cost type, I can see the item ID that's associated with it. If I look at it, see it's other. And if I view that, the ID on that is other. So on my template for my item, I want that to be OTHER. Okay. And then the other side of my entry. So I'm debiting COGS. I'm going to credit you. And if you are doing a journal entry, you want to absolutely make sure that your transaction is balanced. It will not let you enter in a transaction that's unbalanced, an entry that's unbalanced. So I'm going to do 500 on my credit side. This is also going to be E100, and I'm just going to pick a cash account just for the sake of getting this in. So here's my header. I'm hitting GJ on this state, giving a description, and then I have my lines going down here, as many as you need for my entries. Anything that is required, you absolutely need to put in. It's the ID that they're looking for, not the name. And you can put in as many fields as you require. So you might want, customer, vendor, employee, class, whatever it is that you need to put on. I'm just going to do kind of a bare bones one here just to get it into the system. So I'm going to save this as a CSV file then. So I'll save it to my desktop. Call it GJ entry, and I'm saving it as a CSV comma delimited file. So save, great stuff. And then I'm going to go back into Intacct, company setup, this import data section. When I get in here, then I can upload that template by just going to my general ledger journal entries and clicking the import button. You also have the option to, download the template from here if you don't want to do it this way. So let's say, so you can also download the template and do the import in the different various modules within Intacct. So let's say if I go to my general ledger journal entries, I do have an import transactions button up here. So I can hit that and I can download the template from there. So you don't necessarily have to go to the company setup checklist. You can do it this way as well. So I'm going to choose file. I'm going to choose the one that I just made an entry to. Make sure the date format matches what you put in on your template, and mine was month, day, year, so that's perfect. And make sure that this email address is correct. So if there's an error, you want it to go to this email address. So I'm going to do import then. If you had a very big template that you were bringing in, you could process it offline. That is one of the options. So that's successfully imported. Then I'm just going to show you this process offline button that you could check if it was going to be a very, very large transaction that you were bringing in. So I will have got an email, you heard it come through there, from Intacct to tell me that it was imported successfully. So here's the email that they sent me. Entry went in successfully. Thank you very much. If there was an error, it would tell me there was an error, and it would tell me what line the error was on. And then also it gives you an option to download the error file if there was an error on it. So let's say, for instance, I had put in like a name. So let's say I had done Shannon GC. Yeah, I think that's what I have it called. So Shannon GC instead of E100. I'll leave everything else the same, and I'll just change the description to test 2. Save it again as my comma delimited, journal entry 1, save. And then if I try to bring that in, so let's do this one now through the company setup checklist, because we did it through the journal entry the last time. So general ledger journal entries, import, it's exactly the same. It looks exactly the same. So it doesn't matter where you do it from. General entry 1, open, it's going to my email address, import. And it has an error. And I mean, I already know that the error is that I put in the name of my entity rather than my ID. So this is the email that they sent me. There was an error encountered, and it tells me down here, location Shannon GC is not valid. Select a valid active location. So it does, sometimes it can be a little bit more descriptive. Sometimes it's a little bit not so clear where the error is. But it does give you this file to download, which will show you which line the error is on at the very least. So, okay, here we go. So if I look at this then and I scroll over here, it's going to tell me the following error occurred. And it's not very descriptive here. It's actually more descriptive on the email that they sent you, but at least you know what line the error is. And obviously I do know it's because I put in the name rather than the ID on my location. So I'm not gonna do that. You know that that's what I would have to change. So, you know, you'll get the email to say what the error is. Sometimes it's not very descriptive, but hopefully it's, you know, if it's on every line, then it's something that you need to change across the board. It may be just that you put in the name instead of the ID or something like that. But it is hard to know. Sometimes you just really have to kind of look at it and try and figure out, maybe you put in, you know, you juxtaposed a name or something like that. It has to match exactly with Intacct, and you want to be pulling in the ID for your dimensions, not the names. And if you're pulling in a journal entry, it does need to be balanced. You're going to get an error. If you have an unbalanced transaction, I do believe that it tells you if you have an unbalanced. So just to recap then, you do want to make sure that whatever users do imports has the correct permissions to be able to do those imports. You want to make sure that you're using the correct template for the import that you are doing. Don't change the titles in your headers, and don't remove required fields. I would highly suggest that you highlight or mark in some way the required fields so that you know that you have put them in. And then obviously put in whatever fields additional to that you need to be on your transactions. And then for your dimension fields, you want to make sure you know that you're using the ID and that it matches exactly what you have in Intacct. So if I go back to my company setup import data, I just wanted to mention as well that anything that has an asterisk can be updated. So that's a good way to know if you can do like a mass update to your information in Intacct. So if there's an asterisk, then you can. So, you know, vendors, customers, there's not an awful lot of information that can be updated. Your 1099 info, inventory, different things, but you're pretty limited with what can be mass updated. So projects can't be, different things like that. So if there's no asterisk, then it has to be manually updated. For your journal entries, if you're bringing them in via import, you do have to make sure that they're balanced. Otherwise, it's going to prevent you from bringing in that import. And then for your line numbers, you start with 1 for your first line of the transaction, which, contains your header information. And then you just increment by 1. So it's like 1, 2, 3. You get it. And then for the number of rows that you can bring in for a template or a transaction, they recommend not doing any more than 5,000. 5,000 would be the maximum that you would want to be bringing in, or you're going to risk timing out on that. And then, when you have your file, they don't really love special characters. Intacct kind of doesn't handle them very well. So if there's any special characters on your file, I would recommend you remove them before you try bringing it in. So yeah, and then your error message, you're going to get the email. Sometimes it's not very descriptive. Hopefully it will be. It will at the very least tell you what line you have a problem with. If it's every line, then your problem is bigger than just a simple fix, probably, in which case you can absolutely log a ticket with us or log a case with support or whatever it may be, and we can help you get that imported. But hopefully it's just something as simple as you put in the name instead of the ID, or you spelled something wrong, it didn't match exactly what was in Intacct. And then also another common one that I would see is for your credit cards. If you're importing credit card transactions, if the credit card is expired, it's not going to let you bring in that information. So when you're setting up your credit card, this expiration date, it defaults as January 2025 because I think it came in new enough, or else it's just the current year and January. So if you're setting up a new credit card account, you want to make sure that you have that. Or if you don't really mind what about this expiration date, if you're not really tracking that in Intacct, I'd recommend you just put it out to 2035, because an expired card is going to prevent you from bringing in credit card transactions as an import. So that's one that I have seen commonly as well. But hopefully all of this helps and makes sense. And if you do watch this video, make the changes that you believe are necessary to get it imported and you're still having problems, then definitely just submit a ticket to us and we'll try and get you some help on that. Thanks, guys.